Hello, in just a moment we've got the press preview for you as we take a look at the morning papers. First though, a reminder of our top stories here this evening. And Theresa May emphasised common values and called for a renewal of the special relationship between Britain and America in a speech to senior Republicans in Philadelphia. Mexico's president has cancelled a trip to Washington for a summit with Donald Trump in a row over who's going to pay for a wall along the border between the two countries. And a shadow minister, Tulip Siddiq, has resigned from Labour's shadow cabinet over the Article 50 vote, telling Jeremy Corbyn the most effective place for me to counter Theresa May's hard Brexit is from the backbenches. Hello there, you're watching Sky News and the press preview. In the next half hour, we'll be seeing what's making the headlines with Sonia Soda and Isabel Oakeshott. So very good evening to both of you. So let's take a look at what's on the front pages then. And the Eye leads with President Trump's standoff with Mexico as tension between the two countries increases. The Times leads with the Prime Minister Theresa May's announcement at the start of her visit to the US that Britain and America must stand together. The Metro chooses to focus on that highly discussed special relationship between the UK and US, calling Donald Trump and Theresa May the odd couple. Also focusing on the PM's US visit, Mrs May has buried Tony Blair's doctrine of liberal interventionism in a speech quoted on the front of the Financial Times. No more wars like Iraq, quotes the Daily Telegraph, as Theresa May pledges never to repeat the failed policies of Blair and Bush. And Theresa May herself said today that opposites attract in her first speech in the US. That's according to The Guardian. Pension payouts have boosted, says the Daily Express in their lead story. The Daily Mail is leading with hip operations, saying that they'll be banned for people who are able to sleep. The late George Michael's body is still being held by police. That's according to the Daily Star. The Sun leads with television star Rory McGrath, who's been given a suspended prison sentence after he admitted harassment. And that's also featured in the Daily Mirror as their top story. So lots to talk about there with former advisor to Ed Miliband and now chief leader writer at The Observer, Sonia Soda, and political journalist Isabel Oakeshott. So a proper welcome to both of you. And so let's start by talking about Theresa May and Donald Trump, because Theresa May has arrived today in the States. She's due to meet Donald Trump at the White House tomorrow, and she's already made a speech in Philadelphia to Republican congressmen. There's the front of The Guardian. Opposites attract. It's how she described her relationship with Donald Trump ahead of that speech, wasn't it?
I think she's going to be delighted with tomorrow's front pages because she's all over them in pretty positive terms. And actually there was, I heard at the end of her speech, I wasn't watching it because I was in the car on the way here, but you could hear clapping and whooping almost from the audience.
She got a good reception.
So yeah, she certainly seems to have done very well. Of course, the big challenge is when she actually has to confront the Donald and interact with him. In a way, this was the easy bit, getting the speech out of the way. And it really depends on what you want to hear from this speech, how you interpret it. Because on the one hand, she makes this big statement about no more, failed interventionist policies. But on the other hand, she's saying, well, look, we can't, when it's clearly in our interest, we can't stand by. And in many ways, all those interventions that we did, we thought were in some respects in our interest. So I'm not sure how much you really have to read into this.
Well, yes, and it's just to point out, it's the lead in the Financial Times, that line in her speech, and also at the front of the Telegraph as well. They also refer to that, if I can find it, there we go. Theresa May, no more wars like Iraq.
Yeah, and it's all very well and good to say no more wars like Iraq, and of course no one would want to repeat our experiences in Iraq. But that's not really the question facing us now, is it? The really hard question is, say, what do you do in the Middle East and Syria? And you can't just say, well, Iraq was unsuccessful, so therefore we're never ever going to intervene again. That doesn't really work. So I agree with Isabel on this, actually.
For once, we're on the same page.
I think, it was a very self-contradictory speech, and actually May's given quite a lot of speeches like that. So, for example, on, Brexit and Britain's place in the world, she said both, yes, we are free trade, we sort of embrace kind of, open borders, etc. And at the same time, she's very protectionist in her economic speeches. So I think this is more of the same with May. I think it's going to be really difficult the next couple of days. I don't envy her at all. I think there's some of the next couple of days are going to be some of the most challenging diplomatically that any British PM has faced for a while, and particularly this press conference that she's got to do with Trump. She's going to be standing by his side. We know how unpredictable he is. What if he says something really awful? How does she react to that? I wouldn't like to be in her position.
Well, that's right. She's got to a certain extent, cozy up to him, hasn't she, Isabel, if she wants to do a good trade deal. But at the same time, she needs to, doesn't she, distance herself from...
The Theresa May that I know, and I would not claim to know Theresa May at all well, she doesn't do cosy. That is just not her style. So we're not going to see our Prime Minister being a poodle of America, if you like. It's just not going to be like that.
I think she's too smart to play it like that as well.
But she also knows that actually, I know lots of people are horrified at Trump winning the election here, but it's in some ways a huge boon for Theresa May because he clearly wants to make a deal with Britain as soon as possible, a trade deal. He wants Brexit to be a success, and he believes in the special relationship in a way that the last administration, Obama, very definitely did not.
Do you have high hopes of the trade deal, given, I'm just going to bring in the eye, because they're focusing on the fallout between the Mexican president and Donald Trump. The Mexican president has cancelled his trip to see Donald Trump over an argument over who's going to pay for the wall. Donald Trump has now suggested, or his press secretary has suggested, that possibly import tariffs might be introduced on Mexican goods. I mean, how confident does that make you
it's classic Trumpian diplomacy, isn't it? And actually, I'm not that confident because I think it's all very well and good for Trump to say, in the days leading up to Theresa May's visit, yes, I want a free trade deal with Britain, but he's very clear that he's about America first. He's putting American domestic interest first. So you can bet your bottom dollar, because it's America.
Very good.
God, she's
my joke of the night.
Isn't she? Is that as good as it gets? Look, she's even laughing at her own joke. Moving on.
I need to finish this point. So, but yeah, I'm sure that when it comes down to it, a trade deal is about arguing for your national interest. And when it comes to the detail, he's going to be putting America first. So I just think it's a very risky situation for us where we're putting all of our eggs in the American trade deal basket. He's so erratic and unreliable. I just don't think we can count on him at all.
And as you said, it is going to be fascinating because they have announced that they will hold a news conference. So it'll be very interesting to see them fielding questions. And
that is the popcorn out situation.
It really is. We're all going to be glued to our screens tomorrow, I think.
But there are going to be some uncomfortable issues, aren't there? Because they do disagree on lots of areas, one of which you've picked out in the Mail. And this is what he's had to say about torture.
And I think that will be incredibly difficult for her. There's no way she's going to stand up there and say, we think this is okay. And public opinion is overwhelming.
And she's already said, hasn't she, that Britain doesn't condone.
Yeah, that's clearly going to be a dividing line. Trump himself has tried to introduce a little bit of doubt over his own position in that he said, if it works, I'll take advice from my top people on this. But
that's
the fact
Trumpian
that he's
style
even,
nuance for you.
Yeah, the fact that he's even trying to,
he's not very interested in what works, is he? Let's face it, or indeed what's true.
No, I disagree with you. I think he's very interested in what works. I think he's less interested necessarily in the moral debate. He's interested in pragmatics. So if he thinks it works, then I think he'd go for it.
But ultimately, as you say, I think he implied it would be down to the CIA leaders, and also there'd be a lot of people in Congress that might have problems with any change of policy.
Absolutely. Well, the statistics on this are quite overwhelming.
So anyway, loads of reasons to watch every movement of Theresa May tomorrow in her visits to the US. In the meantime, though, we're just going to try and fit in another story before we go to a break, because the Daily Mail does have a picture of Theresa May on its front cover, but their main story is about the NHS and about some of the pressures on it.
And I think this story reveals yet more evidence of the financial straits that the NHS finds itself after its biggest spending squeeze that it's faced, for 50 or 60 years. And in this story, we find out that three commissioning health trusts have said that they're going to be limiting people's access to hip replacements, to knee surgery, really critical surgery to relieve pain. And they're saying here that you're only going to get the surgery if your pain's so critical and acute that it means that you can't sleep. And, the Royal College of Surgeons has come out very strongly against this, and quite rightly too, because I mean, it's just awful to think that care is going to be rationed to people in pain on this basis. It just doesn't feel right, and it's come about as a result of the government not stumping up enough cash
so
for the NHS.
This is one of Sonia's hobby horses. So if she can possibly get in the thing about not enough
Conservative
money,
MPs
not
like
enough
Sarah
money
Wollaston,
for the NHS, then off she goes. What she hasn't said is that much of this is to do with patient responsibility for their own health. So what a lot of trusts are doing now is putting pressure on patients who are very obese and need operations to actually lose weight before they have the operation, not just because they should be losing weight anyway, but there are better clinical outcomes, and it can be quite dangerous to have an operation under general anaesthetic if you're very overweight.
The Royal College of Surgeons is actually opposing that, and it's one thing to do that because there are very clear clinical and medical reasons to. But I think one of the things that comes out of this story is a suggestion, and certainly the Royal College of Surgeons are opposing it, and you think they'd be interested in the clinical evidence. But the suggestion that actually they're saying that it's about people being obese and needing to lose weight, but it's being used as a form of rationing. There's a suggestion they're going to do the same with smokers. And there's also in the inside of the Daily Mail.
There's no point in replacing someone's hip, which is worn out because they're so fat, if they're just going to stay as fat and then their hip wears out again.
No, I think it's really cruel and inhumane, Isabel. And on page 2 it talks about limiting access to IVF as well, which I think is a really difficult issue because I think, if we start to see really intense rationing of IVF treatment, it means that basically you're only going to be able to access fertility treatment if you're rich because it's really expensive, and I think that's wrong.
I think that IVF is a very difficult area. I mean, I speak as someone who went through a pretty awful time trying to have children, and so I know quite a bit about the process of all of this. I don't think it's a right to have very expensive, multiple rounds of very expensive IVF on the NHS. I think
it is limited. I think you're only allowed sort of 2 or 3 rounds or something in most areas.
It's definitely up there on a wish list, but for a struggling NHS that has to ration, then that I think is one of the things.
We're a rich country. The problem is we spend a lot less on our healthcare than in countries on the continent, in the US. If we just put a little bit more money into our NHS, we wouldn't be having these problems.
We've got a lot more efficient.
We're
a lot more efficient.
I mean, Isabel, I'm not going to say that there are no efficiencies that the NHS can find, but there have been studies that compare different countries that actually find the NHS does really, really well on efficiency standards.
OK, and on that note, we will leave it for the moment.
The last word. We can't have that.
No, you just cut it just then.
Yeah.
We'll revisit this subject many times, I'm sure, Isabel. Plenty of chance to talk about it again. But we are going to take a break now. Lots to talk about after that break, including why the super rich are paying £1 billion less in tax. Welcome back to the press preview, where we're taking a look at the papers. Joined tonight by political journalist Isabel Oakeshott and the former advisor to Ed Miliband and now chief leader writer at The Observer, Sonia Sodha. And we're going to turn our attention to the super rich. Inside the Times, the suggestion here that they're getting special treatment, in inverted commas, from the taxman, it says.
Well, I'm just waiting for Isabel to come out with her defence of the super rich.
I do like to have a bit of a shout out for the super rich. I like to stand up for the super rich. I know
Isabel Oakeshott, cheerleader for the yacht owners.
Especially because I want to be a super rich and I'm so far away from it. But on this occasion, I'm going to say that this is pretty unfair, actually. So it's
shock horror.
The shock horror here is that HMRC can't quite explain why people who are worth more than £20 million pounds seem to be paying less tax than they did before, whereas the rest of us are paying more. And, they've got their special, a customers relations manager or
and actually HMRC have got a really bad reputation for this. So what they do is, if you're a really rich individual, you'll basically have kind of like an account manager at HMRC that they call a customer relationship manager, and it's like when us plebs do our tax return, basically. You get letters. I mean, like, it's literally impossible to get through on the phone lines. But if you're worth millions and millions of pounds, you get a special customer relationship manager. And I think HMRC have definitely got a reputation when they go after people for avoiding tax.
They go after people.
They go after people on kind of wealthy people on higher middling incomes, and they leave the millionaires, the really big shots, and they have very close personal
the
relationships.
super rich people
Yeah.
will just tie them up in knots for years on end,
Yeah.
literally years, and have clever ways of avoiding it. Whereas the middle people,
Yeah.
fairly well-off people, will buckle and cave under the pressure.
And it's actually interesting because if you look at the board of HMRC, a lot of members of the board, for example, will come from, you know, big accountancy firms like PwC and KPMG. So there's a question about the accountability there, I think, for HMRC and, you know, how they sort of go after people like this who do exploit loopholes to avoid tax.
OK, let's move on. We haven't got a huge amount of time, but Jeremy Corbyn makes the front page just about of the Eye. It's a tiny little headline there, pointing to an article
Very tiny,
inside.
isn't it? It's kind of symbolic of what's
Yeah,
going on
I
with
mean,
Labour at the moment.
It's not really a huge story. It's of some significance. Labour MP for a very marginal seat in London has decided to walk out of the front bench, saying that she can't properly represent her constituents.
This is because Jeremy Corbyn has imposed
If
a
she-
three-line whip on the Article 50
supporting
bill.
Article 50, and clearly her constituency is not a Brexity constituency. She's got an eye to holding on to that seat perfectly reasonably. I just wonder, you know, when she says in her resignation letter she thinks she can make more impact from the back benches on Brexit, exactly what she's going
You're
to
very
achieve.
dismissive of Parliament, aren't you, Isabel? For one of
No, I'm
these
just
leavers
I'm just
who was
dismissive of
all
her.
about this sovereignty of Parliament.
I'm just dismissive of
Very
a random
interesting.
Labour person that really doesn't have an awful lot of a following, making a huge difference from the backbenchers on such a huge.
I mean,
But
I
if
think
others
really-
follow suit, how much of a problem is that for Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, I think the
Nothing's
last
a problem for him. He just keeps going.
I think the last, I mean, there is something to that, Teflon Corbyn, but the last 2 or 3 days have really shown to an even greater extent what a mess Labour is in, and the Brexit question goes to the heart of that. They don't have a clear Brexit policy. They've got MPs who fall on both sides of the divide, and there's new polling evidence out this week that shows that's a real problem with voters. Voters don't really know what Labour thinks, and that is very, very problematic while it's such a big issue for voters.
OK, I'm going to move
Lobsters.
on. Yes. How did you know? Obviously something in my face.
Desperate to talk
I'm really
about them.
excited about
People
talking
look at
about
me and say lobsters. You're absolutely right. It's exactly what we want to talk about because you've spotted this in the Mail. Tell me all
Sonia
about it.
went straight to this story. She loves a bit of, what is it, battered lobster
Yeah,
or
posh fish
something.
and chips. So this is very posh fish and chips. So this is the chippy that has won like the #1 spot in the UK. It's in Devon. Not only can you get great fish and chips, not only can you use an app to track your like fish from sea to plate, but you can also get a deep fried lobster for 15 quid. I think it sounds amazing. I'm getting on a train to Devon tomorrow.
I would definitely rather have a deep fried Mars bar. And do you know what?
I've had a
never-
deep fried Mars bar. They're absolutely delicious. I had it in Scotland, but apparently I was informed when I had it that they only make them in Scotland for tourists.
I've never even had lobster, never mind deep fried lobster. So
You're
you
missing
are
out,
winning
Isabel.
on the posh gourmet steak.
You two on a train to Devon tomorrow. I wouldn't eat the lobster
fun,
and the
wouldn't
Mars
it?
bar together.
No, I think one would be the pudding.
Excellent choice. Sonia and Isabel, lovely to see you both. Thanks very much indeed.